Space. I reckon that's a lonely place to call home for two travel-weary bluegrass astronauts. But between the long shifts of fishing for hydrocarbon in the lakes of Saturn's moon Titan, there's just enough time to get some picking in. So hush up your mug and fetch a jug of lunar shine while you can join us in the loneliest honky-tonk this side of the Appalachian supercluster. By God, here she is a-coming. A new transmission of podcast with Marcel, featuring Hayes Griffin.
So I said, that's not a mahogany top, that's my wife. I said, that's my wife. Is no one listening to me?
Distress beacon detected from Ulanose Prime.
Sounds like someone's in trouble. I knew there was adventure outside the Appalachian supercluster. Antique, route the message through the CB array so we can take a listen.
Thanks, Antique. Super helpful. Just to open a channel so Marcel can hail them. I'm sure they speak Galactic Standard.
Breaker 19er, this is the big bad Billy Goat. We're 1010 in the wind. How can we be of assistance? Come on.
Copy that, Billy Goat. This is Mulanose Prime. We got a fix we ain't fixing with Alabama Chrome over here. We're looking for gear jammers who can turn and burn some groceries. Green stamps on the flip, over.
Sounds like you need a suicide jockey to feed the bears. Let's cut the jabber and hit the choke and puke. We're in need of a nap trap anyway. See you on the ground, over and out.
What'd they say?
I have no idea. Let's go check it out.
Should we be wearing spacesuits?
Nah, Star Trek rules. Every planet has a breathable atmosphere, right, JD?
Not at all.
Antique, do you detect any hostiles?
No threats detected.
This doesn't seem like a threat to you, Antique.
So I said, that's not a mahogany top. That's my wife.
He didn't even tell it right.
Your endless wit amuses us, but we have business to conduct. Wait here while we assemble the council.
JD, want to fetch us some Millers while we wait?
Coming right up.
Hey, bud, mind if we sit at the bar here?
Oh, not at all. Take a seat.
Wow, your Galactic Standard is great. You hardly have an accent at all.
Well, my mom was from Ohio.
My name's Marcel. This is Hayes, and that's JD behind the bar. What was your name?
My name's Andy Hatfield.
National Flatpicking champion Andy Hatfield?
I thought you'd be taller.
I thought you'd be an Earthling.
I get that a lot. I think it's my eye stalks.
Can you tell us what it's like to compete at Winfield?
Buckle up. Sounds like this story's from the road. Over.
I'd be glad to. You know, the first time I went to Winfield was 2010, and it was like walking into another planet. There's two campgrounds at Winfield. There's the Walnut Grove and the Pecan Grove. We were told from the beginning that you should go to the Walnut Grove. When we showed up, there was no way you could get in there, so we had to take an open camp spot in the Pecan Grove. The way Winfield is set up, or the Walnut Valley Festival in Winfield, Kansas, is most of the partying takes place in the Pecan Grove, and most of the people that used to party are in the Walnut Grove. And we kind of thought it would be pretty safe to be in the Pecan Grove, so we found a spot. The people back there, I'm not even sure a lot of them ever go to the concerts. They're just in it to win it all weekend in this beautiful grove of trees with the craziest campsites. It's just like hippie buses. It's like the most inventive campsites. It's like people have brought furniture for the week. There's tarps hanging from trees. It's school buses painted. It's, people with 40 stickers from all 40 years of the Winfield Festival plastered to the back of their camper. It's just beautiful. It's wonderful. It's everything you want in bluegrass. A delightful mixture of hillbillies and hippies.
Yeah.
I was going to be in two contests that weekend. I wanted to do the mandolin contest and the guitar contest, and I knew there was no way I could prepare for both. So I prepared for the guitar contest, and I said, well, I'll just wing the mandolin contest and see how I do. I get in, I think on Thursday night, I start looking around for a jam because I figure I need somebody to back me up. I start looking around for a jam, and I go over here and I jam for a little bit, and I go over here and I jam for a little bit, and then I go to another jam, and it's the style I play. It's, straight ahead bluegrass, and it's pretty good. They throw a solo my way, and somebody says, hey, why don't you come in here? And I meet a couple of the guys, and they said, what are you here for? I said, I'm going to be in the contest, and I was picking pretty good. I felt really confident, and I remember it because I met this guy from France, in Paris, a bluegrass player from Paris named Pierre. And I can't make that up.
I think you just did, but
I could
I'll
make
roll
it
with
up.
it.
Honestly, I could make up Pierre. Said, what would be the name of a bluegrass guy from France? Pierre.
Pierre.
There's a guitar player there who's really good, and I end up begging him to accompany me the next day. His name, I'll tell you his name. His name's Steve Benedict. He's from St. Louis. He's one of the best Rice-style rhythm guitar players I've ever met. He really, I could tell he didn't want anything to do with playing at that contest. He did not want to do it. But he was a nice guy, and I somehow roped him into doing it. I wake up the next morning, I go knock on his trailer, and he is completely out, completely asleep. I don't know what time it was, 11 a.m., 9 a.m., whatever. And I'm like, okay, let's do this. Let's run the tunes. He's dragging, and he doesn't really want to do it, but he's going to do it for me. So he comes to the contest with me, and I've got my mandolin. And at this point, I'm playing mandolin in a band, all the time. So I feel confident playing mandolin. We go back to draw numbers, and I reach into the bucket, and I draw number 13. And I think, well, this doesn't matter to me. I'm not superstitious, but of course, if you've ever played Little League, you have some superstition in you.
Oh, yeah. And there was probably a gasp over the crowd, right? As that was drawn, like, oh.
Right. I think you may overestimate
Cold wind.
the gasping spectators, the number of gasping spectators during the 9 a.m. number draw.
Yeah, that's right. There's thousands of people there just watching the numbers.
Right.
I think it's on ESPN5, right?
It is. It is on ESPN5. So I go to play my first round. I get up on stage, and during my portion, the sound equipment just stops. And I'm just playing acoustically during the thing, and then it comes on, and I keep going, and it comes back on, like some point during the song. But it happened. The sound just went off. I don't know if there's a power outage. I don't know what happened. And it's not like they said, well, now you can get it back up and do it again. What I remember about it is I still felt like I did pretty good. I was like, well, I saved it. I did pretty good. And so I saw Pierre hanging out backstage because he had come to see me pick. Mm-hmm. And I went up to him. Pierre, how did I do? And it was the scornful turn of the head that only a Frenchman could have done. That was like that made me knew I was horrible.
Wow, Pierre.
And it was wonderful. It was so perfectly French, perfectly I could tell that. I could tell it wasn't good, and it was true. And I didn't make the second round.
The judges are not at the front of the crowd or anything. They're getting piped the sound through the sound system for anyone who doesn't know. So when your sound cuts out, the judges presumably just miss half of your tune, which is a pretty big deal, right?
I think that could have been the case.
Yeah.
There's kind of no do-overs there. It's just whatever happens.
Yeah.
I don't know whatever happened with that, if they heard that, or I don't think it would have mattered. Thinking back on it now, I don't think it would have mattered. I don't think it was good. I was so motivated that weekend that I was going to win something. So remember, my dad was there. He comes up and he says, well, what do you want to do? You want to go home? Or I don't remember. He asked me how I want to go home. He's like, what are you going to do? Sorry, you didn't. And I was like, I'm going to start practicing for the guitar tomorrow. I remember going back and talking to Steve Benedict, who was my accompanist for that. And I played him some stuff. And he's like, okay, what else you got? And I played him another thing. He's like, okay. And he said, here's how this contest works. People come the first year and they figure it out. They come the second year and they figure it out. They come the third year. And that's when they start winning something. And I started thinking about it, but I want to win this weekend. I don't want to.
That's great, Steve, but
I didn't tell him that. That was my thought. And so I stayed up till 4 o'clock in the morning practicing my pieces. And I threw away one of the pieces, and I figured out what I needed to have, and I went and read the rules to the thing. And the rules say that the judges don't hear your accompanist. And I thought, well, I don't need one then. I'm going to play without an accompanist. I'm not going to... This guy, he was great. He would have done it the next day, but I could tell he wasn't that into it. Not because he just wasn't into that. So I stayed up till 4 o'clock in the morning the night before practicing. I remember it because at 4 o'clock in the morning, from the pecan grove, there was an explosion that was like the loudest firecracker I have ever heard. That just like... happened. And it's one of those things where something happens and everybody just roars like, yeah! You're like, why are there this many people up at 4 o'clock in the morning ready to roar at a firecracker? But there were.
That's crazy, man. I mean, I'll say this, Andy, as someone who's been to Winfield twice, I made the mistake of wandering into the pecan grove at around 11 p.m. one night. And, oh, man, it's like... Literally, Marcel, it's like Burning Man and Bean Blossom are happening on the same festival grounds, and they're just like separated, right? Anyway.
That is hilarious.
That
That's exactly what it's like. I think one of the reasons I was up till 4 o'clock in the morning was because the campsite next to me was playing a 2-hour version of I Know You Rider. The way the story goes is I get up the next morning and I go to the guitar contest. My dad was asleep. He wasn't even awake. He didn't even get up for it. But that's Dad. That's okay. I did not draw number 13, so that felt good. I had my 2 songs picked out for the first round. I don't know what I was going to do for the second round. And I was so nervous. And I had my Seagull guitar. First person I saw was Eric Harden with a Henderson guitar. I didn't know what a Henderson guitar was, but it's a nice guitar, and I knew he sounded like a ton of bricks. I saw these other guys there, these names that I had seen on the internet, these names that I had read about. And I went up on stage, and I played my part, and I felt like crap. I got off stage, and I felt like I had played horribly.
Oh.
And somebody said, how'd you play? I was like, I sucked. Here I came all the way to Winfield, and I just sucked. I, at one point, left the little pickers corral where everybody's at, and I just, went looking for something to do. And I found, a street musician, busking along the midway there where the food trucks are, and I jammed on a tune with him. And I called my dad, and I said I played, and he was in the tent. Woke him up. Said, well, I played my round. He said, how'd you do? I was like, Dad, I sucked. He's like, well, what do you want to do? You want to go home? I was like, I'm just going to hang around. I'll probably get some lunch or something. And we'll just stay and enjoy the festival. But one thing I didn't do is I had left my guitar back behind there. So I went back and I just started hanging out. And I started talking to people. I started talking to Alan Shadd. And I said, Alan, when do you stop getting nervous for this? And he said, I'm always nervous. And I started listening to everybody who came off stage. And everybody who came off stage said, I sucked. And I started thinking, well, if everybody sucked and I sucked, I might have a chance. I started thinking, well, I made some mistakes, but I didn't lose the song anywhere. So maybe it wasn't as bad as I thought it was. Well, all of a sudden, they get to the part where they call numbers for the second round. They called my number. And I was like, they did what? They called my number. So I made it into the second round. And so I grabbed a buddy that I'd been playing with there. I had met there that day, a young Jake Workman. And I said, can you back me up? I showed him how I was going to play Jerusalem Ridge, and he had it. And so Jake backed me up on Jerusalem Ridge. I played the second song by myself. It was like something I had written. Out of all that, I ended up getting third place. And I was almost ready to walk away from the thing and just go get lunch.
You'd been
and
halfway
I just
home,
happened
right?
to stay around long enough to hear my number get called.
Every time I hear people talk about Winfield, they always mention grown men crying, people making some small mistake and they're just they're crushed over it. It's so much pressure, it's so much weight that I imagine no one walks away positively thinking that they killed it. I'm sure.
Well, somebody said to me that first time, I said everybody's nervous except Carl Miner. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, Carl would just walk out on stage and he'd be smiling and stuff. And so I said, well, that's what I'm going to do. So from then on, every time I went to Winfield, the way I beat my nerves was to walk on stage with the biggest, goofiest, Branson-worthy smile I could come up with. And I would wave at the crowd and smile just like the biggest, dumbest smile I could. And it got to the point, because I did that so often, that people would clap when I walked on stage. Like, because they recognized me as like the guy that smiled. But it was all
guy.
just to kill my own nerves.
Yeah.
That's hilarious.
A little goof, for sure.
Well, I was going to say, I ended up getting third place at that contest. And you know what the guitar was I won for third place?
What?
It was a Taylor 8-string baritone guitar.
What is that? What?
It was tuned, like if you capoed to the 5th fret, it would be a standard guitar. But it had 8 strings on it. The center 2 strings, what would be the D and the G strings, were in octaves. It was the strangest guitar, and I ended up selling it to somebody. It's one of those that I maybe wish I had, but why would I ever need? But it was a beautiful sounding guitar, but it had a very limited like usage of things you could do on that guitar.
Very specific circumstances demand that guitar.
Very specific circumstances demand an 8-string baritone guitar.
So you went back to Winfield, though. That's not your last time. What happened when you went back?
The next year, I knew that everybody would have like looked on YouTube to see who the previous winners were, because that's what I did the year before. And so next year, I felt like I was one of the faces and then one of the names coming. And I came in with a lot of confidence. I knew how to prepare for it. That was the main thing. And I spent a long time preparing for that contest. I knew what it would take to prepare for it. And then I was able to win the second time I came.
That's awesome. What? So between year 1 and year 2, just out of curiosity, was it more of like a mental thing that you were preparing in terms of like mental stability and centeredness, or was it like actually reworking the arrangements, seeing what worked better for the winners and stuff like that?
There was nothing. I've done all these contests now, and there's nothing I can do to deal with that mental part.
Yeah.
That happens in the moment, and it's unexpected.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't know how to deal with that. And I perform on stage all the time and have no fear. But there's something about as soon as there's a contest, as soon as there's a prize, as soon as there's somebody watching it, as soon as you're the only person, it's a big deal and it matters. Then the nerves creep in for me, and then my hand just starts shaking. And then how do you deal with that? And I just had to figure out ways to deal with that literally in the moment. I'll tell you one thing I did, because I'd heard about this thing, and it's the worst practice technique you could ever imagine. You take a jar, you take 10 pennies, and you take your song, and when you've played your song perfectly, you put a penny in the jar. And you do that until the jars have all 10 pennies in the jar. However, if you make a single mistake, you dump all the pennies out of the jar.
That's brutal.
It is a brutal practice technique, but that refined me for that Winfield win.
Wow.
But you do that, you'll get better at whatever it is you're working on, but you may hate yourself by the end of it.
So that's why everybody comes off stage saying I sounded like crap. Yeah. They knew that they had dumped out all their pennies right there, you know?
I had a friend who said something really thoughtful one time, and he said that you're the only person that's heard every mistake you've ever made. Other people, they don't care. Yeah. Not like that. They don't care. It doesn't matter. You know, your audience is not yourself. Your audience is whoever's out there. You know, for the contest, I figured my audience is whoever these 3 judges are. They got to be there. Who are these people? I don't know. Are they members of the band? Are they members of the Intergalactic Flatpicking Society? I don't know. But I figured, well, what they wanted to hear was just good, clean musical playing. It's like, well, I could do that.
I feel like maybe the contest has like changed how you even write your arrangements too, because a lot of times you don't write the hardest, most difficult, ridiculous lines ever. The lines may be difficult, but they're more like smart and executable than just like purposefully ridiculous, right? Because yes. I feel like you need to execute on the lines when you go compete, right? If you just write the hardest thing ever, you won't be able to play it on the day of. So what's the point in writing that?
Yes, and I would purposely do that. I would like put in like almost like moments of rest into the arrangement. Like where, okay, I got through my hard section. Yeah. Now I do this little single string section here that's not as hard. Like it gives me a chance to rest and kind of refocus for something else harder. I discovered a long time ago that the listener can't tell what's hard and what's easy. They just hear music.
I can't even tell as like a fellow musician sometimes, you know? Like
Yeah.
you miss it too.
Yeah, exactly.
In your Turkey and the Straw arrangement, it's a great example, man. Your second your second A part that's in like minor, is in the relative minor. That's actually the really hard part. but everyone thinks of the like, you know, chords kind of moment as being the really difficult part. But no, that later A part is the harder one.
It's brutal.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. I will say that when I first went to a contest, the only solo guitar flat picking arrangement I had was really that Turkey in the Straw thing. And that kind of became the model for how I would do other things. You know, that in those second years, I kind of was able to use that as a model. It's like, okay, this is what works. Okay, I can build off of that.
I've definitely written some difficult arrangements and taken a look at Turkey in the Straw. Thought, man, if I was Andy Hatfield, what would I do right here?
Thank you.
That's great.
Anyway, that reminds me of the time...
Sorry to cut you short, but it looks like they're about to call you in for a meeting with the High Council.
So, what appears to be the issue?
We Mulinonians lead a simple agrarian lifestyle, but there are those that seek to disrupt our way of life.
When did this show become so serious?
The citizens of Texarkana, too, have threatened to destroy our farmland to drill for precious minerals. We Mulinonians have no interest in this bubbling crude.
Oil, that is.
Black gold.
Texas tea.
Yes, our only recourse to their threat is to surrender the ancient bluegrass artifact our people have protected for years. Many have tried to claim it, but it has been our sacred duty to keep it safe.
What is it?
That I cannot tell you. Its influence is too great. It possesses a power that has corrupted stronger men. We pray the Texarkanians use its power for good, but we doubt that will be true.
Why don't y'all just move away from here? Sounds like Californion 7 is the place you ought to be. Just load up your space trucks and move to Beverly.
Sector Beverly, that is.
Swimming pools.
Yes, movie stars. I'm familiar with the reference, thank you. We're quite content here and won't be moving.
So to save your people, you need us to take an unknown shipment with mystical powers across the entire Appalachian supercluster to Texarkana too?
Yes, in under 28 hours.
Don't say it.
Smokey and the Bandit.
I don't know, guys. This sounds dangerous. What can your people offer as compensation for the considerable risk we're taking on?
All we have to offer is a case of our finest Mulinonian lunar shine and...
Deal.
Fine negotiating there, Marcel.
We'll be on our ship while you all get the ancient bluegrass thingy ready.
All this talk about traversing the Appalachian supercluster for opportunity and to save your homeland, it kind of reminds me a little bit about the story of Southerners in early bluegrass music. Are you familiar with what has become known as the Southern diaspora, Marcel?
I am already thrilled to go through this. Yes, I am. Go ahead.
He said sarcastically. No. Well, the 30s and 40s, obviously the Great Depression was happening in America and things were just getting shaken up, right? People were moving all across the country. And the only reason I bring this up is because Ohio has a lot more to do with bluegrass music history than people think, and it's kind of as a result of this movement back in the day. And that's a pretty boring way to tee up the fact that, did you know that my stepmother's mother went on a double date with the Osborne Brothers in the mid-1950s?
Sounds like the boys might be talking about some bluegrass history.
No, I didn't know that. But I'm glad that I now do. Okay, hit me with it.
This is about as like, is about as like 7 degrees as you can get in Ohio. We don't have many famous people from here, so we got to go with the Osbornes, you know what I mean? Yeah,
because
man,
you have the Osborne connection, you can pivot to many other famous people, right?
Exactly, right? You know? No, but seriously, this is one of the wildest stories that my step-grandmother, I guess we'll call her, was associated with her persona. They were originally from Dayton, Ohio, and I don't know if you know much about Dayton, Ohio, but it was kind of an interesting crossroads back in the 1930s and 40s. I was mentioning this like kind of migration out of the South that was happening during that period in time, right? There were two patterns of movement happening in the country at that point. People were either moving north to go to factory jobs or moving west to California for all the opportunity out there. My step-grandmother and her family are essentially caught in the middle of this. They're native to Dayton, Ohio. It's a center for like industry and aviation, so it attracted a lot of workers from Kentucky, West Virginia, and the surrounding area.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you know this about the Osborne Brothers. They are largely associated with Hyden, Kentucky as their hometown.
Right.
But after World War II, their parents actually moved them just outside of Dayton, Ohio, and that's where they called home for decades.
We don't talk about that, though. You're sort of saying things you shouldn't be saying.
And I think that's kind of how it's been treated in the history of bluegrass music, And I don't want to say Ohio has been like, unnecessarily kind of tamped down in the history of bluegrass, but maybe overlooked in the same way that people just overlook Midwestern states in general, right? That we're kind of like drive-through country,
This is all an excerpt from Hayes's book, in defense of Ohio as a bluegrass state.
Well, the funny thing is, they beat me to the punch on that one, Marcel, because there is a book called Industrial Strength Bluegrass that essentially tells this story much better than I could possibly ever tell. Yeah.
You're not even the best at writing a love letter to Ohio.
I can't, right? Yeah, we needed Fred Bartenstein or Bartenstein. I forget how it's pronounced. But he's a scholar that lives in Dayton. He's actually at IBMA every year and puts on panels and discussions for bluegrass educators. But he wrote the book in conjunction with Joe Mullins, whose dad, Moon Mullins, was an Ohio, Dayton area, and Cincinnati area radio DJ back in the 40s for bluegrass. Wow. So, yeah, like I said, really interesting history here. But the Osbornes, they move here like in 1945, 1946, their parents came for some of the factory work. It's interesting because their career started in Ohio. They didn't even start in Kentucky. And did you know that Bobby Osborne started his career playing the electric guitar? Like, this is why they don't talk about the Ohio years, you know what I mean? This is like...
If it was anyone, though, I'd suspect the Osbornes. They always got a drummer and an electric bass player and stuff.
Right. This actually made a lot of sense to me when I started digging into the history, because they didn't even start as a bluegrass band. They started playing like country music, just electric country music. Bobby was on electric guitar. He played with some local Ohio musicians called the Miami Valley Boys, the Miami Valley Playboys in 47 and 48. That was kind of his first pro gig. Playing electric guitar with an electric mandolin in the group. Be Still My Heart. I love it. Their first radio appearance was actually in southwestern Ohio there on WPFB for a barn dance on June 3rd, 1949. And oddly enough, this also marked the first public performance of the tune Ruby by
really?
Bobby Osborne. He had never sung it before this day. He had known the tune but never sang it publicly before June 3rd, 1949. So on his first Ohio barn dance, he busts out what later was obviously like kind of their most legendary tune.
Hit. Yeah.
For not just them, right? Yeah, for everyone.
When did he debut those sideburns?
Yeah. I think we had to wait until the 60s. That was past Ohio. Ohio wouldn't put up with that crap. That was when they went, like full Nashville on it or whatever, Did
I ever tell you about the time that I met Bobby Osborne? And
no.
At the time I had, basically just like Elvis chops. That was the only facial hair I had. And and I'd grown them out, so they were all, scraggly and very like General Burnside Civil War kind of thing. I met Bobby Osborne. Actually, I met Bobby Osborne's wife at the Station Inn, and I told her, I was like, well, Bobby's the reason I grew out these sideburns, right? I gotta have these big old chops like Bobby used to have. And she was like, well, have you met Bobby? He would, he'd love to see him. No joke. This is how the conversation went. So she goes and gets Bobby Osborne, like, out of the green room or the back or whatever, and, like, pulls him over. And I spent maybe, like, 15, 20 minutes talking with him and his wife about sideburns, and there was a bunch of weird, funny little quotes that came from it, where his wife was just like, make sure you do a real good job of shaving this part on your chin, so they're separate. And,
I mean,
weirdest thing
if
ever.
we're talking about like sideburn advice, that's where we want to be getting it. You know
That's
what I
true.
mean?
That's true. Yeah, you want to get it from Bobby.
That's hilarious. For anyone who doesn't know what we're talking about, just please go look up the Osborne Brothers in the mid or late 1960s. It's pretty legendary. Yeah, and oddly enough, I think that sideburn energy is what kind of turned off step-grandmother from the Osborne Brothers Double Date. So this was in the mid-50s, right? We're like talking a good 15 years before the sideburns era. She kind of she knew at that point in time that musicians were not her bag. I think that was the kind of main quote coming out of the Double Date. It was like, it was a fun time. Those Osborne boys were nice, but I don't know if I wanted to attach myself to a musician type, And I was like, gee, thanks, Grandma.
I can read between those lines. I know what's going on there.
Yeah. That's kind of what I was thinking too, and I'll we'll just let that part of the story rest. But that was like in the mid 1950s, like I said, when they were just starting their music career in Ohio. So they weren't the Osborne Brothers yet. You know what I mean? It wasn't like super famous.
Yeah, and in that way, step grandma, I get it. It's just some dudes.
Yeah, local yokel bluegrass musicians, you know what I mean? That stuff was a fad. By the mid-50s, it was already dying anyways, right?
Don't put up with any of that sideburn nonsense. That ain't worth
No
it.
way, man. But I guess Bobby and Sonny must not have been too heartbroken by it, because they went on to, kind of... really, they were the ones... I know that there was a whole scene of people and amateur musicians that really created a community here. That's how it is everywhere, right? It's never just like one artist that rockets to fame. There's always like an incubator for this, right? So Southwestern Ohio was a really cool incubator at that time, I think, and the Osborne Brothers and Jimmy Martin actually came out of that scene. Did you know that Jimmy Martin lived for a time in the Dayton area and performed with the Osborne Brothers, right?
I refuse to accept it.
Yeah, it's this is why we gotta have this conversation. I'm like, Ohio Bluegrass History Day. Everybody listen up, all right? Yeah. They came for the story about Grandma dating Bobby Osborne, but they're leaving for the Ohio Bluegrass history.
That's right. That's right.
But seriously, dude, in 1951, after a couple years of just kind of bouncing around the Midwest and like West Virginia on the Wheeling Jamboree and back and forth, they eventually hook up with Jimmy Martin and the Lonesome Pine Fiddlers, bring him back to Ohio in 51, and record on a tape machine at the Osborne Brothers' home for Kitty Records. And this was the first, like, noteworthy for a number of reasons, because one, it was the first time that Bobby Osborne had ever been recorded playing mandolin. He was a professional musician for like 5 years, and this was the record that debuted his mandolin playing, which is kind of crazy, right? This record was also the first ever recording of Sonny Osborne, who was like 12 at the time or something like that. It was pre-Monroe band Sonny Osborne, when he was, 14 when he joined up with Monroe.
Wow.
Yeah. And it was also the first recording of the Osbornes and Jimmy Martin together. So July 1951, kind of crazy, they released the record and began calling themselves Jimmy Martin, Bob Osborne, and the Sunny Mountain Boys. This is the first time that the Sunny Mountain Boys is ever used. It's like, right, I discover all these things. I'm like, oh my God, the Sunny Mountain Boys was invented in Ohio,
So first recording of Sonny playing banjo, first recording of Bobby playing mandolin. Jimmy Martin is, a rising star, blowing up. And first appearance
Had
of
just left Monroe, yep.
Actual band name.
Yes. All in Ohio.
That's crazy. That's a lot.
In 1951. It's crazy, man. Yeah. And then, fast forward over the next couple years. In 52, Sonny gets the job with Monroe. Bobby had been drafted at that point, I think, or wait, did I get that right?
Everyone get ready to cancel Hayes if he says the wrong thing right now.
Yes.
Hayes doesn't know his Bobby Osborne history. I know. I'm just not going to say it. I'm going to see if he knows.
I think I actually did get that right. We're going to keep... Yes, I did get that right. So Bobby gets called into the service that year because we were in the Korean War at that point in time in 51. 52, Sonny gets the job with Monroe. And then later that year, they actually get back together. Bobby comes back from the service, and they move to Detroit with Jimmy Martin. So there's some Michigan bluegrass history here, too. For those of you that don't know, Route 23 goes up from Asheville, North Carolina, all the way through Kentucky and up into Ohio, and then into Detroit, Michigan. So there was this saying back in the day that, you know, there were 3 things you needed in the South to be a successful person: reading, writing, and Route 23 to get the hell out and go get a factory job up north. So those boys took it literal and got a job on WJR. And this is the year that Bobby gets his Fern F5, which is kind of legendary. So he gets his like actual mandolin. But the most interesting part of this story is actually when the Osbornes leave and go back home to Dayton in 1955, because Jimmy stays behind in Detroit, keeps the name the Sunny Mountain Boys, and then from that point forward it becomes Jimmy Martin and the Sunny Mountain Boys.
It's like a prequel adventure, you know? Like, this is like in Solo when Han Solo gets his jacket and his gun, the Millennium Falcon.
You're
like
you're right there with me, dude. Yeah. No, and we're not even like, I'm not even going to take you into the famous Osborne Brothers history, because this was all like their incubator period, right? Yeah. And it was all Ohio based. In 55, they moved back to Ohio, and this is around the time that I think Grandma was, you know, on the scene and, you know, double dating and all that kind of stuff.
Grandma was on the scene.
On the scene, man. You know, what would they call it back in the 50s? You know what I mean? What would the, you know, the term be?
All I can think of is Frank Reynolds and Always Sunny being like, "You kids want to bop?"
That's great. But yeah, man, when they move back in 55, 56, that's when they first actually start referring to themselves as just the Osborne Brothers. And interestingly enough, that year there were 2 guys that they got to hire in their band due to some like member change-ups. One, this little-known guitar player and singer named Red Allen, who was also living in Dayton at the time. And then 2, a fiddle player by the name of Art Stamper, who later, of Monroe, Jim and Jesse, Stanley Brothers fame, recorded for George Jones, Dwight Yoakam, and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. So those 2 guys joined the band, and then it's like, at that point, nothing could stop the Osbornes. They were, shortly after that, on the Opry, you know what I mean? And then their kind of permanence in the Bluegrass Hall of Fame was solidified in those next couple of years. But Ohio set them up for success. You know what I mean?
And they never thanked Ohio, you know? They never came back and said, "You know what, Ohio, we really appreciate you. Here's a cake."
Yeah, man. But hey, at least we've got Joe Mullins writing books and holding a festival every winter, which is actually happening in March, called the Industrial Strength Bluegrass Festival. But the history's getting, you know, corrected, and I'm hopeful that people will soon recognize Ohio's true importance to the history of bluegrass.
Well, you know, what's interesting is they always call Kentucky the bluegrass state, but if you look it up, it's actually Ohio that's the bluegrass state.
I think it is, yeah.
Yeah, and people have just been mixing up that. It's crazy. It's crazy that they would do that.
You are about to get so much hate mail. Maybe I am. I don't know.
Seems like the boys might be wrapping this one up. You 2 mind breaking the 4th wall and telling the folks where they can find you online?
Yeah, of course, JD. My name's Marcel. Check out lessonswithmarcel.com and Lessons with Marcel on YouTube if you want to learn how to play bluegrass guitar. What about you?
My name is Hayes Griffin, and you can find me on the YouTubes as well at Hayes Griffin, or you can check me out at hayesgriffin.club if you're interested in some guitar lessons.
Say your line one more time, Andy.
Andy.
Andy?
Well, that's at the beginning of the line.
I'm glad that's on tape.